This will be the last day of our working together, but I hope that it will not be the last day to see you, and also not the last day for you to continue on working. So just let me say a few words, because I felt between yesterday and today a little bit of a tension and of a pressure of some people, because we have this a little bit semi-official presentation this afternoon. So I wanted to take away a little bit this presentation. This is a workshop. This is an experimental thing with a huge group of 25 persons with a huge program. We had these lessons every day, 3 hours, and we had some personal meetings, and we had collective things and presentations. So I think for the time we did a quite good job. So I'm very happy about this, and please don't put some supplementary pressure on this afternoon. I will close the lecture cycle with one thing, coming back to the origins and even to the reason why I'm here, perhaps, because I came here in 2013 with Georges Duberman for a symposium and for a little exhibition. So I wanted to close the conferences cycle just with 1 hour of presentation of this project, and then we can also perhaps measure what has been done between 13 and 15. I prepared something for 1 hour, but time is going on very quickly. So I think the best would be that I show you a quick extract of a film, a making-of film that Louise made in 2013 to just put you back in this experiment we did here in 2013. I don't know if some people herein have seen the project here.
No,
who has
I've seen your website.
On the website, but yes, some of you have been here. So this will be also the occasion to perhaps come back to those questions. It's a very complex story, and I can't tell this in 40 minutes, but perhaps I could do it in a more open form. Just come back to some of the principles of the project, and then we can have a little discussion. I just start with 3 or 4 minutes of a little film, the making of the exhibition of 2013, and then we have a little talk about this project, and then we'll show what was going on after this.
So the idea for this exhibition was to lay the pictures and images on the floor, and not to build up walls to hang them, to have this beautiful light come in, and to have like islands on the floor where the public can walk in, turn around the images, and then have a closer look to it. It's a project coming from Europe, coming first from Hamburg, from Germany, where Georges Duberman did an exhibition about the principle of Atlas, the Warburg principle with contemporary art. And I photographed this exhibition during the exhibition, and these pictures are the result of that exportation of this other exhibition. So it's a photographic interpretation of another exhibition which has gone, and this is some kind of the phantoms, let's say, of the older exhibition. And it's a photographic interpretation with fragments, with close-ups, with looks on documents, but also on works of art. So the idea was a photographic transformation of this whole project, and it was a beautiful idea to invite it here to Rio de Janeiro and to make it travel. So this is the first image of the exhibition, representing reprints of the Warburg Atlas, some examples of that atlas. The interesting thing of the Warburg Atlas project was that he arranged all those pictures he had collected, and in a box, about 1,000 pictures he had, and then he asked a photographer to document the constellation of these images. So the principle is to explain via this constellation different kinds of survival of images, as Warburg said. So the interesting for me as a photographer was to react to that principle, that the original images of Warburg do no longer exist, and the only way we have the documentation of the constellations of Warburg is a photographic image. So there are glass plates of those photographs representing the different Warburg constellations. And for the original exhibition Atlas in Hamburg, there were these reprints on aluminium, and I photographed those plates leaning on the wall, like a montage of the exhibition. And as you see, there is some kind of trompe-l'oeil with different elements like this little post-it in it. And I'm taking this principle here of the montage of the exhibition to go on the other side and to go on the glass walls and to have these exhibition views in the same way as we are putting up images for an exhibition.
I will show a second extract with Georges Lieberman.
So the exhibition space is quite special, and I wanted to react to that exhibition space and to make it some kind of interactive project for the public. And then there is this symposium we are organizing. So the exhibition will also be a support for discussions, support also for the public coming for the symposium and discussing within the pictures. So it's also a reaction to discourse about pictures and what is picture today and how pictures can be transformed.
So I am very happy we have the possibility to show, I would say it's a transformation of a long process which began years ago when I devoted myself to the work of Avi Warburg and to this importance given to the atlas of images, the notion of atlas. I like this woman. You have to take this, not to edit. Huh? Okay, you keep the because I like the fact that here it's a museum with many children. I like this very much. Okay. So I devoted the work, historical and theoretical work about the question of the relationship between images and knowledge. People who developed the knowledge, scientists, art historians, thinkers, philosophers, all these people cannot create the knowledge without putting this knowledge into a form. It happens that the major thinkers are also people who create new forms for knowledge. And reciprocally, I discovered that many of the great artists, especially the same time, the time of Warburg, the 30s in Germany, in France, and so on. Many great artists were also creating new forms of knowledge. So my first purpose in this Atlas exhibition, which was a very big one in Madrid, it was 2,500 square meters. In Hamburg it was quite 5,000 square meters. So we reacted with Arno Gisinger in a way to transform this exhibition, which was so big, so heavy, very expensive, and so on. We decided to transform it into an exhibition of an exhibition. You understand what I mean? A kind of photographic reflection on this exhibition. At the beginning, the word atlas was used for geographical maps in the format of a book. So kind of reduction of in the 16th century the maps were very big, and when the atlas was invented it was a kind of reduction of the atlas. And so this is in the same way, it's a kind of reduction of a big exhibition. Atlas was the title. In Greek mythology you have the gods and the titans. The titans are the anti-gods. The titans want to give to the men the power. For example, the famous story that Prometheus gave the fire to the men. Prometheus was a titan, and Prometheus was Atlas' brother. So both Atlas and Prometheus were against the gods, so to speak, and both had a link with the emancipation of humankind, not to be commanded by the gods. What is very important in this exhibition is to make the link between knowledge and a certain idea of when you know, you suffer. It's a big job. It's not only a work. It's to know is also to suffer, because when you know, when you enter in the details of what is history of mankind, it's you suddenly discover a whole world of sufferings. So Atlas is the figure in Abby Warburg, especially Abby Warburg, who was very erudite, he knew a lot of things, but he was also a very pathetic man. He was, he was quite crazy. He was for 5 years in an asylum. He was a kind of very fragile person, and so there is a link between the knowledge of human history and the fact that you cannot separate this knowledge from a certain suffering, because history is history of struggles. Struggle for emancipation, for example, emancipation of mankind from the gods in the mythology. But of course, today around us, all the time, emancipation of men from authority of other men. So this is a political question. So I am very interested that this exhibition, which is mostly about knowledge, has some political consequences, some political references, and this is for me very important, especially because of this place. Do you have another question?
Really, I love this film. Thank you very much, and it resumes in a very good way what we did. I just try to say some words, because I try really to make it quick, and then to have the time perhaps to questions for this project, because as you know now, this project went further on, and we had the occasion after Rio de Janeiro to have a new version of the same work in another space in Beirut, in the Beirut Art Center in 2014, and then especially in the big exhibition center for contemporary art in Palais Tokyo in Paris last year. And so there too, we engaged somebody to make let's say a making of film too. And perhaps the best way to give you the contrast and the evolution of the project is to also show you just a couple of minutes of this little montage, and then you have the difference, and then we can have a little talk about the two projects. The form is quite different to that what Louise did here. It's a a very experimental form, and it's just a little montage of a couple of minutes because we filmed the last day of the exhibition in Palais Tokyo, and then we came back on Monday, where we started to destroy all the images, putting them away from the wall. So it's a combination of these two aspects, and you will see that there is also this sound installation, which is quite important.
Gioia, ma quanto inestinguibile terrore, in mille parti della nostra memoria, in mille parti dell'anima la guerra non è cessata. Anche se non vogliamo ricordare, la guerra è un terrore che non vuole finire nell'animo, nel mondo. Del mondo antico e del mondo futuro era rimasta solo la bellezza, e tu, povera sorellina minore, quella che corre dietro i fratelli più grandi, e ride e piange con loro per imitarli, tu, sorellina più piccola, quella bellezza l'avevi addosso umilmente, e la tua anima di figlia di piccola gente non ha mai saputo di averla, perché altrimenti non sarebbe stata bellezza. Il mondo te l'ha insegnata, così la tua bellezza divenne sua. Del pauroso mondo antico e del pauroso mondo futuro era rimasta solo la bellezza, e tu te la sei portata dietro come un sorriso obbediente. L'obbedienza richiede troppe lacrime inghiottite, il darsi agli altri troppi allegri sguardi che chiedono la loro pietà. Così ti sei portata via la tua bellezza, sparì come un pulviscolo d'oro. Dello stupido mondo antico e del feroce mondo futuro era rimasta una bellezza che non si vergognava di alludere ai piccoli seni di sorellina, al piccolo ventre così facilmente nudo, e per questo era bellezza. La stessa che hanno le dolci ragazze del tuo mondo, le figlie dei commercianti vincitrici ai concorsi a Miami o a Londra. Sparì come una colombella d'oro. Il mondo te l'ha insegnata, e così la tua bellezza non fu più bellezza, ma tu continuavi a essere bambina, sciocca come l'antichità, crudele come il futuro, e fra te e la tua bellezza posseduta dal potere si mise tutta la stupidità e la crudeltà del presente. La portavi sempre dietro come un sorriso tra le lacrime, impudica per passività, indecente per obbedienza. Sparì come una bianca colomba d'oro. La tua bellezza sopravvissuta dal mondo antico, richiesta dal mondo futuro, posseduta dal mondo presente, divenne un male mortale. Ora i fratelli maggiori finalmente si voltano, smettono per un momento i loro maledetti giochi, escono dalla loro inesorabile distrazione e si chiedono: è possibile che Marilyn, la piccola Marilyn, ci abbia indicato la strada? Ora sei tu, quella che non conta nulla, poverina, col suo sorriso. Sei tu la prima, oltre le porte del mondo, abbandonato al suo destino di morte. sogni di morte. Ah, figli, erano mostri le madri, lente fatalità che si compiono fuori dal mondo. Noi non siamo mai esistiti. La realtà sono queste forme nella sommità dei cieli.
As you have seen, this took a quite different form and a more, I would say, extended form compared to what we did here in Brazil. And I wanted just to give you a little insight very quickly in the construction of this version we did in Paris. Let me do this with a couple of pictures just to explain you to what it corresponded. I think that the real difference between the two versions is also, as you could see on the film, that we have this extended form with not only the photographic work about the Atlas exhibition, which is here on the wall, but also, and this is something we did already in the very first version in Le Fresnoy in France in 2012, to combine this photographic work with extracts of films, cinema, documentary cinema or fictional cinema of the 20th century, which is dealing with the question of pathos and the question of lamentation, because George at the time was working on this question of pathos and the way how pathos could be transformed into a very political and a question of society. So he has chosen many extracts of those films where he thought that at a special moment in the film, this personal mourning or pathetic mourning about the death of somebody could turn into a very political statement, let's say a manifestation or a demonstration of political revolution or uprising. So this is a parallel story, let's say, going ahead with the Atlas Suite series, and you have this combination between a, let's say, horizontal atlas of moving images with the soundtrack of the extracts of the films. By the way, this was an extract of the film La Rabbia, the Pier Paolo Pasolini, and you had this soundtrack in this very big space, and there is this double, let's say, exposure of moving images on the ground floor projected by these projectors from the ceiling, and then on the other hand you have this long montage of images on the wall. I show you some of those pictures and I try to explain how we constructed this exhibition, because the principle, as you heard in the first film, of this project was to adapt the project to the space. And as you perhaps know, the space in Palais Tokyo is quite big, 1,500 square meters, and you have this very special form here, this, let's say, L, this round L here. So as you understood it this week, I'm working with maquettes, I'm working with models, I'm working with this way of taking some abstract distance to the exhibition space we had on our disposition. So the idea was to come back to the first version where we already had this combination of projected moving images and still photographs. And in this special space, you see that you have two zones on this way. The first zone until the curve, then you have these little staircases, and then a second niveau, which is a little bit higher in the space, but it's just one space. So we try to have this very large movement in the montage, let's say, like a film here, going around and coming back here. And on the other hand, these projections, like an Abbey Warburg atlas, just a moving and sound atlas projected on the ground floor. So coming up with this maquette and coming up with the analysis of this space, we decided to have a structure which would be this yellow part here, let's say a balcony, to have people go up and to have a look from above on the projected images which were on the floor. So I don't go into technical details. This image just to show you that we wanted to have a very physical experience where the visitors came in and didn't see anything of what was going on here on this zone. They had to move up a staircase, and then they went along this balcony here on this yellow zone, and they had this look on the projected images from above. And then in the corner we had this round staircase which was going down to the other level here, and this is the second staircase. So there are three levels in fact in this space, and we try to manage this level of space and to stop the projections here at this point. So the projections are only on the ground floor. When people came in here, we had this huge projection of the 42 Atlas panel of Warburg on lamentation, projected from this side, but on a transparent material that you could have a look on it from both sides, from here and from here. And then we decided to have this balcony constructed here. So people moved up here, walked along, and then came down here and went further on here to the third level and could walk in the images, and that's what you have seen. Just a couple of images to show you how the construction went on, because the incredible thing in the Palais Tokyo is that they really construct for each project a new structure. So we had this privilege really to have this structure made by the staff, and as you could easily imagine now, this balcony is very much inspired, and the whole structure of guiding the visitor is very much inspired by the panoramic experience. Remember what we said about the staircase, the looking of things, and even this round here was very important for me, because as you know now, with the paper we can go around with this on the structure with the paper, and this very round curve, which was beautiful, was very much inspired by the question of the faux terrain, this false foreground. So you have this double thing between a balcony and looking at things from a certain distance, and then you can go down. So this physical experience was really very important in a quite huge space. So I think the height of the ceiling is at 8 or 9 meters, so it's very, very high, and the volume is very important. So the images were very, very much bigger, 240 to 310 centimeters. Very much bigger than we had it here. They were on paper, like in the Benjamin project, and directly put on the wall, but on a certain height. They could appear bigger here, but you see the human figure, which is quite laid here on this side. So it could be quite monumental, but when you're really in the space and when you're at the distance from the balcony and have a look on these images from 7 or 8 meters, they become, I wouldn't say tiny, but they become relative. And this proportion was also thought together with the proportion of the projections coming up from the ceiling. So the technical thing was quite difficult to put them on this height, and I had incredible stuff to do this. So when you're up on the balcony in the situation with the lighting, we decided to have this special lighting here on the first zone of the still images to give, I would even say, like a theater light to these images compared to the projections. So two ephemeric forms, paper on the wall, and the projections on white surfaces on a gray ground. So this is the the way people realized the installation when they came up the staircase and they discovered what was going on behind. So there was also this discovery, like in the panorama, you know, you go through this dark tunnel and then go up the staircase and then you discover something. So this special effect was very important for me. Then you go ahead on this balcony. There is some kind of, on one hand, linear form because it's like a traveling you exercise when you're going with your body. But on the other hand, there is this parallel aspect of the projections. And there is this very Warburgian principle to have this coincidence of different moments of the film coming together. It's even stronger than with still images because you never could control exactly at what time this face could appear with this extract from another film. So this was quite experimental and quite open as a process, and the physical experience was really very important in this first zone of the exhibition because you were completely caught in this cinematic and cinematographic atmosphere. Whereas in the second zone, I decided really to have another light, which is a quite simple neon light. And then here you're at the point where you just come down from the staircase and go into this other zone. And this is once again this very Brechtian principle to, let's say, stay away and step away from the illusionist atmosphere of the first zone and then come and get down the staircase and to realize that these images are just paper images and they are just images put on the wall. Once again with the same principle as I experienced it in the Benjamin experience and exhibition in a little bigger format, but always the question to reveal the space and not to put images just in a frame on the space, but to reveal the space with the images. So it's adapted to the space conceived before, but then anyhow these decisions how to take this picture and how to make this on the corner and all these elements, this is a very concrete and a very technical, I would say, decision at the moment of the putting on the wall of the images. So here you come back from this, let's say, Brechtian zone where you realize it's just images, and you can go down and step down on the ground level and to come back in a certain sense to these images on the ground floor. So this is from the other side, and if you go down here, you have this special effect also, as you have seen on the first images, that the people walking in here are taking part of the project. So there is this dialogue of, let's say, bodies looking from above to the ground floor, and on the other hand, these people on the ground floor are looking up to the balcony. So there is this, in a certain way, dialogue between the different visitors in the space. And when you get out from here, this was the, let's say, exit, the logic exit here, you're back again on this way. So here see the balcony on a 4 meters level. You could have this look from above, and you could also have this other look on the other side.
Arno, what's that on the left side?
This?
This too, yeah.
Well, this is a little text of explication and orientation on the different things you could see here. Let's say it was a map, and it was on a special, like a little light box, but not a classical light box. There's this new material where you can put some energy in just a very, very thin, let's say, structure, plastic structure. That's a flat light box. This was the orientation, because we didn't have any legends here eventually. The whole thing was explained in another form, which was besides, and this was an explication of the different extracts of the films, and also the explication of the map, how things were organized in the space.
I'm trying to understand the Warburg theory about memory and image. Like, you brought for this work as the man who refers by bibliography or something, or you did work in Atlas project or this. You understand? No. It's a man reference for Warburg, no theory, or it's like the Benjamin project that it's constellation images inside you, like
Yes.
you did by
Several answers, but I try to be clear. The first one is the origin of the Atlas project is coming directly out of the Constellation Benjamin history, because this is the reason why Georges Didier Berman contacted me. In fact, he has seen the Benjamin work, and he has even written a little text for my book. So when he had this idea to continue, as he explained it in the first film, to continue this huge project, which was a classical, let's say, huge exhibition at Reina Sofia in Spain, and then went to Germany also. And we were looking for a new form of this project to continue the idea, but to continue it photographically. So when Georges thought of a new way of dealing with this, he contacted me and he said, well, you could be interested in that. So you could perhaps photograph the exhibition, and then we could have a project in times of photographic reproduction. This was clearly a Benjaminian idea. And as George and me together, we were both very Benjaminian at the time. It was quite logical to meet each other and to develop something together. And then George explained me his project and said, well, this is a long-term studies about Warburg. As you perhaps know, George is working on Warburg since 25 years, and he is the one who brought in France these thinking, I would say, back to Europe, back to even Germany. So it's very interesting because he is a French researcher and philosopher, but he is always working with those many times working with German references. So Warburg was at the time already somebody very familiar to Georges Didier Berman, and he said, I have done this Atlas exhibition, what about a new form on this? So this was the logical and the quite simple explication why Constellation Benjamin and Warburg were connected. And indeed, I tried to continue with this experimentation of photographic prints on wallpaper and do this installation work. And the second aspect is the photographic, let's say, dimension of the Warburg work. When George contacted me, I was very much interested in the photographic aspect of Warburg, because as you know now, Warburg was one of the first art historians to work with photographic reproductions. He collected, and he also made cut-offs of the reviews of the time, or he could contact a photographer, let's say in Florence, to have this or that photograph. So he was one of the first art historians to really be aware of the importance of the photographic interpretation of an artwork. This is the first aspect, which is very interesting, and this is the basics of the Atlas Mnemosyne, because it's essentially a work with photographic reproductions. And this way of developing the Atlas Mnemosyne is essentially based on photography. It couldn't be possible without photography, because photography can put this photograph of a sculpture in Florence besides, let's say, a tableau of Veronese in another city. So it's essentially photographic, and it's a photographic atlas that Warburg put together. So this inspired me in that sense. And the second is perhaps even more important, because, as you know, Warburg had a photographer who photographed those constellations he constructed. Sometimes, and now some of researchers think that the Warburg system of the Mnemosyne Atlas is a very closed, finished system, but it is not. It is a, I would say, even didactic program and project of Warburg to have at the time he had 1,200 images in a box. And then at a special situation with his interpretation and what he was thinking of a good constellation of, let's say, iconographic models, he put those images together. But if you have a closer look to the glass plates of the photographer who photographed the constellations, you see that Warburg constantly changed these constellations. So it's not a closed system, it's a very open system. But paradoxically, photography makes it close, in that sense that we think, wow, this is an image of constellation 42, this is Lamentation. So this is what Warburg thought about Lamentation. Well, that's right, the day X he thought of this in that way, but 1 week later he could put other images on Lamentation or new images on Lamentation, you know? So it was a complete open system in the tradition of Atlas of the 18th century, using photography for art history. So this was just perfect to put them together. And then it was the collaboration between an art historian, George Lieberman, and myself, a photographer, which was some kind of renewal of this question, and this old question of relationship between photography and art history. And as Malraux said, and as you know now, art history has become an art history of things which are photographed. And I think this is even more clear now with internet and all the exchanges of images. But art history before the invention of photography wasn't the same than art history after photography. Anna?
No, I'm thinking here because I've been to the Barbara Institute in London.
Yes.
And they have thousands of images, of
Yes.
course, and draws.
Yes.
And I didn't understand how they, because after Barbara died,
Yes.
they continued this collection.
Yes.
In a way that I didn't understand really how, because
Uh-huh.
it's very confusing there. And
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you know how they
Uh-huh.
collect these images, because now I guess they have more images collected after his death than
Yes.
before.
Yes, I'm not really a specialist of the question, but as far as I know, well, you have to know that Warburg died before the Nazis get into power in 1933, so Warburg was already dead, but there was this Warburg Institute, and the Warburg Institute was saved when they put it to London. So it's the story about exile of an archive, I would say, but it's after the death of Warburg, and they kept the original way of conceiving also the library and the photographic collection. And it was quite uncommon, but they respected, I think, the way that Warburg constructed the library and the photographic collection. I think George would be a good specialist to talk about this, because he always said to me, he had worked a lot in the library especially, and he said it is for him the most interesting library, because it's reflecting the way of how Warburg was thinking, and as you know, there are strange books together in not a very common form, but it is very interesting because the library is also reflecting, as the atlas forms, a little bit of the Warburgian way of thinking, and I think it's the same thing for the iconographic questions. So it's in that sense more a respect for the origins. It's the old principle of archives. I mean, this is a very important question. What do you do when you get an archive? Do you stay on with the same method and the same system of organization of the archive, or do you destroy it? Do you organize it in another way? And one of the most important principles of historians and archivists is to keep this together. Imagine you get an album of your grandmother, and there is a certain order in this album, and on one hand you could say, well, there are many images in this album, so you take these images away and you put them in another system. This is what archivists try not to do, because the way the photographs are organized in the album say very much about the person who organized it and about the things. But I'm really not, unfortunately, a specialist how they deal with it, but I think it's the power, and it's also the weight of the original archives which went on, but it's quite labyrinthic.
Yeah, because while we were talking, I was thinking maybe they changed the way they organized to follow what Warburg was doing.
Yes.
I don't know.
I don't know
It's
neither.
very
I didn't.
difficult to get into this library.
That's right. Yes, that's
like,
right.
You don't know, you're lost in a
Yes, exactly.
things.
Yeah, George loves it because he said, I never had a library where there are two books which seem to be nothing to do with each other, you know, but then you open them and you see, oh, Warburg thought of this. It's quite crazy, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it's this way of organizing libraries. And I come back just one second to Stefan Zweig, because I talked yesterday to one of the specialists of Stefan Zweig, and he is here in a large project about libraries of writers. Mm-hmm. There is the Marbach Institute in Germany, archives of literary writers and texts, and they have a huge project about writers' libraries. And their idea is to understand more the work of the writer with the library. So this person, Oliver Matuszek, is here to have a look on the books which are still here in Petropolis or here in Rio de Janeiro, to reconstruct the library Stefan Zweig had here in Petropolis, which was a very, very small library compared to what he had in Salzburg. He had 10,000 and 10,000s of books. He had a huge building in Salzburg, and the library at the time was one of the biggest libraries a writer could have at the time. Here in Petropolis it was very small. But I say this because I think it's always interesting to also use those forms like, well, the photographic archives or even a library or other things to understand the way of thinking. And in the Warburg sense, I think it's a little bit the same thing, but for us it's completely confusing. You can't understand it. And as George said on the video, I mean, you have to know that Warburg was somebody who was really traumatized by the First World War. And he had this, I would say, psychedelic shocks in the 20s, and he stayed 5 years in Kreuzlingen in a psychiatric clinic near the Lake of Constance. And the Atlas work is the result, let's say, also of this period, because he is studying the Atlas work, the Mnemosyne Atlas, after this. So you have the life of a very important art historian, then you have the trauma of the First World War, then you have the clinic, and then as something, I could even say, to save him, there is this eruption of the Mnemosyne Atlas, which is a fragment today, because he wanted to go on with this. Then he dies, and it stayed a fragment. But just to say, this is a very open form, and all these supports of memory, like libraries or archives, are very interesting to have a look on, also to understand the thinking of somebody. And for me, it was interesting to understand Warburg with photography. This was my personal interest when George contacted me to make the project, because in that situation, I mean, it was the same case in Vienna. Somebody contacts you and says, would you like to do this, or could we work together? And then you think of it and you say, is there a real interest for me? Is there something I could connect to what I'm interested in? That's the way I try to give importance to the projects. And sometimes I say no, when I don't feel that there is something I could connect to with my personal work or my interests, I have to say no. In this case, I said yes very quickly, because the first is to work together with George Didier-Roman, which is a real privilege, and also to know the man is a real privilege. And then this photographic aspect was very, very important for me to think of it.
How did your way of photography speaks with the photographies in the Atlas? You know, how did you connect, or do you change the way of photography, or did you try to speak with these photographies?
Yes, I mean, I was thinking of this old question and old problem of transformation, let's say, of an object, of a work of art, into photography. In a very, even when we come back to Baudelaire perhaps, and to come back on this text on the role of photography, for a very long time, art history considered photography as an instrument and as a humble servant, in the Baudelairean sense, to say photography is good to reproduce an artwork. And in the first period, I would say there was a quite, let's say, a little bit naive conception of the photograph, to say you could photograph something very objectively. And the only sense of photography concerning art is to reproduce art. But then very quickly we understood that, or even the researchers in the 19th century started to understand that photography is always a decision combining different factors, technical questions, lights, perspective, objective, etc., etc. So there is no objective way of reproducing an artwork. There is one very interesting text by the Swiss art historian. His name is Wölfflin. He was one of the most important art historians at the end of the 19th century in Basel, Wölfflin, and he was one of the precursors, also very related to Warburg, but in a very different sense. And he has written a little text in the 1890s already about photography and how to photograph a sculpture. The text was about how a photographer should photograph a sculpture to help the art historian. And this is very interesting because he published it in 3 parts. The 2 first parts had the same title. It was Wie man Skulpturen fotografieren soll. How to photograph sculpture would say you should photograph it in this and that way. So he gives the rules to have a sort of standardization of how to photograph a sculpture, which is a very difficult thing because a sculpture has 3 dimensions. How to photograph it, from which side to photograph it. And then the 3rd part of this essay, he published it during the First World War. He put up the same title, but he made it a question. And he said, Wie man Skulpturen fotografieren soll. So the same title, but as a question. And I think there was something going on at the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, in this relationship between photography and art. And as you know, perhaps with André Malraux or Walter Benjamin, this question became very, very much complex. And nobody today would say that you can objectively photograph a work of art. So my idea was to put this in a very subjective way and not to do a documentation of an existing exhibition, but doing a photographic interpretation of the exhibition in a very subjective way. And at the same time also, let's say, think about what is photography doing with this. So what does it mean when I photograph a 3-dimensional object? What does it mean when I photograph a projection of something? What does it mean when I photograph a book in a vitrine? So this was the guideline I had. So the principle was to do it very subjectively and to propose something else and not to reproduce the work, but to interpret it photographically. So George, in the end, he said, well, I couldn't recognize the exhibition, which was a huge compliment for me. And it was this complete transformation. And then, as you can see here, you put them together and you could put this collision of different significations also of the different artworks, which is giving something a little bit, let's say, intuitive. So the thing was coming away or getting away from the documentation of an exhibition and going into an interpretation of the exhibition in a very purely photographic form, always related to this idea of Warburg and photography. Yes.
Could you show us some images of the exhibition
Sure.
here? Because I couldn't.
Here, yes.
Just to understand what you
Yes. Well, here it was very interesting because we had this discussion here. We had this invitation, let's say, in 2012. We had the first version in Le Frénois. Then we had a contact with MAR. And originally, the idea was to make the exhibition in the other building. Perhaps I could show you just quickly the 2 buildings in this size. This is also a wonderful maquette, so I didn't have to have it made, but it was just there. So originally and logically it was in this part because it was considered as an exhibition, it was art, so well, let's do it here. So for a long time, for a couple of months, they sent me the plan for I think it was on the 4th floor originally. So I conceived an exhibition for the 4th floor of this building. And then I think it was in February, just 3 months before the opening, Paolo called me with a Skype and he said, we have a little problem here because it's the opening and it's so complex and everything. So we have a problem of space. So we have these different exhibitions and everything. So, and he was very, very, very polite. And he said,
a little problem.
And he said, yeah, no, what do you think about the other building? Could there be a possibility of the other building? Because finally we don't have the space for your exhibition here. This was a clear thing. So he said it very politely, and I said, well, what is the other building? And then he told me a little bit the story of the 2 buildings and the memory of the buildings and what this building has been before. And I saw this incredible architecture and this very white cube and everything. And he said, well, this will be on the 4th floor. There will be the future library. I said, oh, okay, good, interesting, perfect, library, okay, this is a very good idea. And well, the other problem is they said, well, there are no walls. Sorry, it's an exhibition space, but it's not an exhibition space. But we can put up walls. We can do everything here. And they sent me some photographs, and I said, no, why walls? I wouldn't have walls. I prefer thinking of the space as it is, and I will think of the space as a future little library connected to the other exhibition space. And then I was really passionate with this, I would say, this idea that it's more in the part of the thinking of images than the exposure of images. So I was saying in the end, when we discussed it with George, it's even better to be in the other building, but it was the library, the upcoming library. The space was quite there. In a very free way, I saw this light and I said, well, let's use this light coming in from the daylight. And the idea was in the same sense that I could send my files to Brazil and the work could be produced here, not to transport anything, but to send the files and to materialize the images here. And then we went back to this question of the ground floor. So I said, okay, if there are no walls, we just lay them out and we make islands. And the choice of the images were really was related also to the question of library. There were many books and reproductions of books and interpretations of books also, because we were thinking of this idea. And then we had these walls, and I thought it was good to have something on those walls in this transparency. So yeah, it was quite simple to do, and then we chose this material with a very, very cheap wooden material, MDF, and to lay them out. So we had a little map we did, and at the time it was this, as I have shown you the two images, and then there was this sound, and there was this crowded place and the transformation and everything, and I found it very interesting to have this connection to the city at that point. This is to make it clear. Yeah.
But this version in Brazil was before the first version used multi-projection?
It was the second one, but we couldn't use the projections here. This was the other thing. We had 4 versions of this project. The first one was in 2012 in Le Fresnois in the north of France. The second one was here. The third one was in Beirut, and the fourth one was in Paris. So we had this first version, which is quite big too. I can show you just one image to show you what it looked like. So for here we had to decide not to do the projections because it was a clear room and we had this light and we couldn't have the projection. So we said, okay, just let's do only the Atlas Suite exhibition in a very modest form. I mean, this is 150 square meters. It's just the 4th floor here. This is just not really an exhibition space, but there was, as I said, the symposium also, and for me it was a perfect support to think about methodologies. It was not a classical exhibition. So my dream was then, and this was, we had decided, but I don't think that has yet been done. I had an architect friend who conceived some furniture. You saw it a little bit on the film that Louise did. And my idea was at the end of the exhibition to use these wooden plates and to construct those furnitures and to give it to the educational service here for the children. I don't know if they did it. I put up the question. I had no answer today, but I will. When Paulo is come back, I will ask him again. So the idea was not to keep this as an artwork, but to transform it. Like I put away the paper to transform these plates into like little stools. So the design is there, the plan is there. You just have to cut them and to make them together. So
I have a question.
yes, 1, 2, yeah.
Yes. You were saying about how photography would maybe close or establish or give a form to the atlas, something that conceptually was open, then always giving the possibility to make a new combination of these images and everything. I was wondering if this research on the atlas or on the neurogenous system from Babo, how could it be interpreted today? Thinking on algorithm or open form presentation.
Okay. Yes.
Also a bit connecting to this the question that Pablo posed on the first day about the metadata.
Yes.
How could we maybe, because for Babo in the end of the 19th century, so photography was the new medium of the time. And how could we not adapt, but make it more actual? So the dialogue between the new media from our time, so this algorithm possibilities, or search engines, how could this, the concepts of partus formal, or these ideas of this perpetually recombination possibilities find a form today with the new media that we have today. So.
Well, this is a very... wait, if you find it, you tell me.
No, I would like to know, because when Dieter Huberman was here at the end of one of his conferences, so a researcher from here, from Brazil, Ivana Bench, posed him the question, what Abibabu would think about Google search and everything, and then Didi Huberman, he was very, no, I'm not working with Google and everything. He was more classical in a way, and he was not like, he didn't show it by that time, interest on this question of this.
I remember the situation, and now you try to put this question to me.
Exactly. Since Didi Huberman didn't answer, you can do it.
I mean, if Didi Huberman cannot answer, how could I answer? It's just not possible. I mean, he's the philosopher. No, without kidding, there are perhaps two very interesting aspects. The first one is also, let's put it a little bit with some distance. Frankly, if you open your Google images, you have something like that.
Yeah.
And it's perhaps, this is also psychoanalysis perhaps, but I think that the huge Warburg revival and the revival of the Atlas form, which is, let's say, 20 years old, you know, nobody talked about this in the 50s. Now everybody talks about this. So there is, I think, something very interesting going on of a confusion of things, because I think many people would say, well, this is like Google Images, you know? You're putting in a word, and then you have this screen, and you have an atlas. But it isn't. And this is what George always says in a very, very strong way. He says, an atlas is an image of thinking. And there is a reason why this image is close to that one, and why that one is far away from that one, and why those are together, etc., etc. So it's the contrary from the point of view of contents and of intellectual operations. It's the contrary of Google Images. It's an organized thinking. And this is also the difference between, let's say, archives and an atlas. Archive is a possibility. This is an organized space of power, as I said yesterday, not a naive thing which is really just a form. This is a very important thing. But an atlas is something organized, where the thinking is expressed in an image, or especially in a, let's say, even in a photographic image, because this panel is conceived for one afternoon and then it's photographed, you know. And the problem I have is also with these publications, you can now find these plates, you know, it's just perfect, it's wonderful, you have all the explications here and everything, you know. But in fact, we do think that this is a closed system, once again, and it is not a closed system. But how can we open it up? And I don't really have an answer to you, but the second aspect is indeed very interesting. Could there be something which is not a cliche or a confusion of confusing Google Images and the research by a word and all the power of Google? You know it, like me. I mean, this is not a hazard. This is not a. There is a reason why these images coming up, but it's not the thinking in that sense of Warburg and let's say of an art history knowledge of a person who worked on this for a whole life. But how could we find something? Frankly, I don't think that it's the metadata. I don't think that's the metadata. In a very archaic way, I tried to do it a little bit in this way, in saying, well, I'm also taking 2,000 pictures, and then we are combining these pictures, and we had it quite intuitively in the selection with George, because we had the same problem. We said, well, there is this exhibition at MAR. We would have the space for, let's say, with this format, 55 images. How can we come from 1,500 to 50 images? And what could be the selection, and what could be the way of thinking them together? And this is a question always always coming up when people ask us, well, how did you choose this and how can you do it? And it was more a physical and intellectual operation of two persons than of a computer or a program or the metadata. It was really assuming that there is a selection, and we had these little prints, 10 by 15, like this, 3 piles, and then we had a little play. We looked at the images together with a table, and then we said, yes, no, why no? Because, and then we had this play and came down from 1,200 to 800 and from 800 to 400, and then we said, no, how many images could we take there? What format do we have? And then also considering the space, the format and all these criteria, we had this selection down to the special number, and then we had, let's say, 100 images, and then I printed them again, and then we laid them out. So it's an interpretation of, let's say, an archive of images, but it was clearly subjective, related to the exhibition space. In this context here, there were many images of books. In Beirut, there were many images of wars. So there was this allusion to the geographical and political context of the exhibition space. But indeed, it was a very subjective and very personal choice in the photographs. So my option was the contrary of a machine's program. It was the assuming a very personal aesthetical and contents choice. But yes, I can't really answer to the second question. I avoided like George, as you see.
And the last version was in Beirut.
No, the last one was in Palais Tokyo in Paris.
Okay.
There was something in between in Beirut.
Could you show?
Yes, I show you some images. I can show you something of Beirut. And Beirut was really very important because it's a question of format. Once again, this is a little maquette, especially made with a very light wood, because I was flying to Beirut and I didn't have something of very heavy. And it's even a more abstract model, because they told me in Beirut this is a very industrial building, very regular, and we could eventually remove those walls in between the pillars. It's a little bit like this, very simple building structure with these pillars and then these structures in between. They said you can change it if you want. You can create your own parcours in this. And this, once again, I said no, I'm using the form structure of the exhibition before, and I will adapt the work to this. But the maquette was made to eventually change these walls and to create it in another sense. And then the political context and also the visual context of Beirut was very important for me, because it's really astonishing how images have an importance in the public space in Beirut. A little bit less now when people try to calm down a little bit this visual crying in the streets of politicians, of advertising, of billboards. So it's incredibly invading this visual aspect. So the idea was the billboard. And what is the billboard? And in a certain sense, to put the billboard into the building and to have another dimension of the image. And this was also, this was in January, and we opened Palais Tokyo in February. So this was the idea to, let's say, to test a bigger format too. And I decided at that point that Palais Tokyo and Beirut would have the same format. So this was 1 month before, and it was also in parallel. So for 3 months then, both exhibitions coexisted on the same project, but with a completely other form and another selection of the images. And then once again, I decided to turn around this structure. It was a little bit much more work as here. Here it was done in 1 day. We just lay out the images. And here it was a little bit more complicated, but it was really interesting. We worked for 1 week or 10 days together. Yeah, the idea was here also to have this line and to go around the walls and everything, and to have this other proportion. And you see, this is very monumental, and the monumentality in Palais Tokyo was a little bit far away, so the proportion of the image was different. And here it was very close to the ground floor. It was just 40 centimeters here. Very neutral very neutral form of the light also. I found the same neutral neon light in a white cube as for the images I made at Falkenberg, because the original photographs have been taken at the exhibition in Hamburg with Harald Falkenberg, and I will finish with this image. This is very important perhaps to see the origin.
But in Beirut you didn't have the projection?
No, we had a little projection to show what it was, but it was not really the projection either. So this is the exhibition space in Hamburg where George showed the original exhibition, and in that space I photographed all the artworks. So the same atmosphere, the same light, and also this question of framing. It's an old fabric which Harald Falkenberg has transformed into an incredible art space in the outskirts of Hamburg. So I found a little bit the same atmosphere of the same pale neon light of the taking of the pictures in Beirut for the exposure of the paper.
Which movies?
Movies?
Yeah. Because I saw another.
Many. So this was out of the archives of George's researches. So there were Pasolini's and Godards and Angelopoulos, and so there is a whole list. If you are interested, I can give you the list. But it was not a question of choosing an author or this or that. It was for George really looking at those 5 minutes, was Eisenstein and everything, looking on those 5 minutes or 3 minutes or 7 minutes where the author of the film tried to express this question of pathos in his own way. So it was a kind of montage of quotations, and George always said, this is the same thing I'm doing on my big table or on my montage table. It's just put into a public space and into an exhibition space, lay down in a bigger dimension. This was the original idea. But if you want, I can give you the list of the extracts of the films. Okay, how can we... Yes, thank you.